Welcome to the Office of the Leader of the Opposition's press conference for January 19, 2023. Today I'll introduce my panel from the right. To my right, there is none other than Ms. Dawn Hastings Williams, Member of Parliament. To her right, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Aubrey C. Norton, Member of Parliament. To his right, Mr. Sherwin Holder, Member of Parliament, and to his right, Mr. Elson Lowe, economist. Today's press statement will be read by the Leader of the Opposition.
Good morning, and thank you for being part of this press conference. Dawn Hastings Williams is PNCR General Secretary. This opportunity is taken to inform the people of Guyana that Mrs. Dawn Hastings Williams has been appointed General Secretary of the People's National Congress Reform. Mrs. Hastings Williams is a long-standing member of our party who is eminently qualified to serve as General Secretary. We wish Mrs. Hastings Williams all of the General Secretary of the People's National Congress Reform. All Guyanese must condemn the government for its callous firing of LaShonda Ellis. LaShonda Ellis, a 23-year-old woman who was a resident at the now demolished Cane View Mucker housing area, had her services terminated as an employee of the Ministry of Home Affairs. The government ridiculously contended that she has been fired for acting in a manner that would bring this is laughable. The government has a vice president that has brought this entire country into disrepute when allegations of bribery and corruption were leveled against him. The government did not see it fit to even investigate the vice president. It therefore can be contended that it is maliciousness and vindictiveness that would have led to the termination of our servant, blatant violation of the human rights of Ms. Ellis. All right-thinking Guyanese must condemn the government for its action. PPP fails Guyanese again with the 2023 national budget. Many Guyanese are familiar with the saying, empty vessels make the most noise. While the Minister with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashley Singh, spoke for over 6 hours, this budget is as vacuous as his speech was long. Budget 2023 presented an opportunity for the government to change course, to show the world that it had the people of Guyana at heart. Sadly, it has heaped disappointment after disappointment on the Guyanese people. Budget 2023 confirms that the government is clueless, incompetent, uncaring, and anti-poor. Budget 2023 confirms that the government has no national development plan. Budget 2023 confirms that the government is more interested in serving its business cronies than in lifting the quality of life of the Guyanese people. Budget 2023 confirms that the PPP will not eliminate poverty, will not ensure that families can live comfortable and happy lives, and will not build world-class social services in health, education, public utilities, public safety, justice, and a clean environment. Budget 2023 confirms that the PPP is incapable of using our vast oil wealth to transform the lives of the Guyanese people. The Guyanese people demand and deserve more than just pronouncements on large projects and expenditures. They demand and deserve concrete and adequate measures that directly lift our living standards in the short, medium, and long term. Where are those measures to address the runaway cost of living? No longer can the people accept a paltry old age pension, public assistance, and because we gave cash grants, increase are shameful at a time when our country's oil industry is booming. The poverty Guyanese endure today is not artificial, it is real. It is a product of a government that refuses to even contemplate the harsh realities we see every day. Social support for our families could easily be doubled this year. The PPP, however, is only content to offer a heartless pittance. This is even while the real wage is United % of the national budget. Last year, only 13% of the budget went to the Ministry of Education, and this year, only 12% will be spent on education. President Ali fails to honor his words, and rather than increase the share of the budget spent on education, the PPP has been shrinking it. One would have thought that since human resource development is critical to national development, then more resources would have been allocated to education. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Where are the salary increases for public servants and teachers? Where is the decision to make the University of Guyana free? Where are the plans to ensure all our schools across communities and regions have the human, financial, and other resources to deliver quality education to our students? There are none. Where are the measures to expand small businesses, to transform communities, to transition to value-added products, to reimagine Gaisuko and agriculture, to create employment, and to generally give hope to the people? Budget 2023 flops in terms of outcomes and direct benefits on the livelihood of people, but in terms of dollars spent. This practice is deliberately deceptive and must change, starting with a commitment to eradicate poverty in the shortest possible time. Similarly, Budget 2023 fails to speak in terms of quality of life indicators, infant and maternal mortality rates, doctors to patient ratios, teachers to student ratios, crime rates, and access to adequate food. Historic underperformance. The budget is mere platitudes with no specific targets to be achieved in terms of improving the quality of life of our people. The people they saw the government ignore them throughout 2022. They saw the PPP pretend that the nation was impoverished, while huge windfall revenues abounded from the high oil price. Now that the 2023 budget has been revealed, it has only led to despondency. This year will see Guyana's GDP, FPSO, push Guyana's oil production to nearly 600,000 barrels of oil per day, and see the National Resource Fund reach US $2 billion. Under this government, Guyana experiences what economists refer to as the paradox of plenty, where countries with abundant natural resources have poor outcomes and living standards. Guyana can be one of the best places in the world to live. Our people-centered vision, which can deliver on this promise swiftly, stands in stark contrast to the PPP's focus on cronies. For Guyana to truly grow, clearly, the PPP must go. NCN must provide equal coverage of all members of Parliament during the national debate. We hereby put the state-owned national communication management of NCN that the state media is not the exclusive mouthpiece of the ruling party. The state media is obligated to also cover the views and activities of the parliamentary opposition in a fair and objective manner. NCN is funded by taxpayers' dollars. NCN therefore has an obligation to its funders, the people of Guyana. It must cover the people's representative during their participation in national events as critical as the national budget. In so doing, NCN must ensure that such coverage is fair in terms of program, schedule, duration, rebroadcast, and relays. We intend to monitor NCN's coverage during the debate and to request NCN's program log under the Access to Information Act to verify its compliance with its national mandate to the people of Guyana. NCN must stop being the mouthpiece of the PPP and become the institution that airs all the views of the representatives in the National Assembly so as to enable our people to be informed and make informed judgment and decisions. I thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I will take questions from the press statement And I would ask that this be done by the raise of hand, and let's, have a smooth press conference today. Mr. Jevon Vickery.
Good morning, everybody. My
morning.
question is, Ms. Martin spoke about the budget not addressing aspects of what's going on in terms of the cost of living, but some may argue that $5 billion were put aside specifically for this. Are you saying your second question goes with regards to NCN? While your party was in government, it was kind of a similar thing. Would you say going forward that something should be done constitutionally that would prevent governments from using, especially state?
I agree that if a government has the interests of its people at heart, and last year you put aside $5 billion, and the cost of living continued to rise, and people were suffering, that should send a clear signal that $5 billion is inadequate. Add to that, that this budget is 40+% larger here, and human beings matter. The quality of life of people matter. Then it would have followed ipso facto that the increase would have been way above $5 billion. And therefore, to talk about a paltry $5 billion being set aside as dealing with cost of living, to me, makes little or no sense. That's the first point. Under the APNU AFC, I recall during budget debates seeing the speeches of the opposition then, the People's Progressive Party. That's the first point. The second point I want to make is that, like we said, NCN is the property of the people, and the people should have access to it to ensure that people can hear the views of all and make informed decisions.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up. Mr. Norton, how would you like to see the $5 billion spent? I mean, you said $5 billion was given last year. Well, what do you think that they could do differently with this $5 billion?
Well, I wouldn't restrict myself to what they can do differently with this $5 billion. This $5 billion is ridiculous. It was given last year. Society reacted that it was inadequate. So I don't see the need to see what to be done with this $5 billion. And if one notes that it's a corrupt government, part of that $5 billion will end up in corruption, because they will find mechanisms to let the party hacks distribute some of it in grants, etc. And then it goes into the hands of people which should not be in their hands. So I don't want to venture into trying to distribute or redistribute this paltry sum that, in my opinion, is an impasse to the people of Guyana.
If I could also follow up on that. Folks, we have to bear in mind that this 0.6% or something like that. This budget is $782 billion. And during the biggest cost of living crisis for 40 years, you're going to give less than 1% of this budget towards cost of living mitigation. Less than 1%. And in fact, the same amount as last year when the budget was much smaller, as the leader just pointed out. This is a totally ridiculous number. Even if you look at the inflation rate, the projected inflation rate for the country this year, if you look at the minimum wage, you're looking at a far higher number that should be given as a base. And so the $5 billion number, I think, is a mockery of the Guyanese people. The other thing we would say is over the course of the year, last year, we indicated several measures that could have a massive impact on the cost of living crisis, whether it is putting a cap on fuel prices, whether it is providing canter operators and those bringing goods to market with vouchers so that they can get cheaper fuel, whether it is capping or providing electricity subsidies for those at the lower end of the income scale. We've spoken at length about various measures that can actually be leveraged. And we remind the Guyanese people that the government has at its disposal $60 billion that it did not expect to make last year due to the high oil price. At least you would think the government would put the $60 billion towards fighting the cost of living crisis.
Thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Shabra.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Norton, can you please elaborate on what makes Ms. Dawn Hastings Williams eminently qualified, as you described her, for the position of General Secretary? And also, can you say, Ms. Hastings Williams, what will be some of your immediate priorities? And relatedly, how do you see yourself carrying out your duties as General Secretary in the context of the fact that you well, to the best of my understanding, largely reside out of Georgetown. And Mr. Norton, again, why did you pick Mrs. Williams over Mr. Mike Paul?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying I didn't know that I pick anybody over anybody. So I don't see the reason for me saying that. I want to say this to you. This question of the General Secretary of the party is a matter in which I would have consulted within the party, and based on my consultation, I arrive at a decision, and therefore I don't believe it is the place of this party to be telling the public what are the factors that inform the appointment of Mrs. Dawn Hastings Williams. The question of eminently qualified is obvious to me. She has the academic qualification. She has the integrity. In my opinion, she has been long-standing in the party, and most importantly, she has a good relationship with all the regions and so in the party, and those factors would have determined. But I do not want to get any further into this whole question of what resulted. It is the party's decision to choose the General Secretary in its best interest. We have done that, and for us, the matter is closed.
And Ms. Stacey Doolittle, so what will be some of your immediate priorities?
What I will do is we will arrange, it will be unfair to be asking Mrs. Williams these questions at this stage. Mrs. Williams is today appointed General Secretary. We will further speak. We will discuss all the issues, and at the right time, Mrs. Williams will present to you our position on these matters.
Thank you. Questions on the press statement?
Just about a year last year, we initiated several measures that have a massive impact on the cost of crisis.
Mute. Thank you. Any other questions on the press statement?
Yes, just to follow up, sort of on the General Secretary's position. Mr. Norton, does that mean that Ms. Champion Edmund will no longer be sitting in the executive seat, that she has resigned, and Ms. Hastings Williams is now the new General Secretary?
Well, first of all, if you know the party constitution, in her own right, as a member of the 15-member section of the executive, her appointment as General Secretary had nothing to do with her election, and therefore, unless she resigns or there's some violation of one of the rules.
Could you confirm that she was not invited to yesterday's meeting?
All members of the CC are invited to Central Exec on one platform.
Okay, so you're saying in other words she was invited?
You can arrive at your conclusion by logical deduction.
No, sir, I cannot conclude what we're thinking. I'm asking.
No, it's not what I'm thinking. I said all members of the CC are informed on one platform, and Mrs. Edmund is on that platform.
Did you receive an excuse for her absence yesterday?
Even if that is the case, the party is not in the habit of telling the public who was excused and who wasn't excused. That is our internal business, with all due respect to you.
Thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Adam Harris. Mr. Harris?
Yeah, sorry about that. There was some noise around the place. I didn't want to take. Good morning. I'm interested in the budget. Yeah. We have a budget that is 40% larger. No pay increases for public servants and all of that. And there was talk about consultation with the private sector and everybody else. Did the opposition have an input into the production of this budget, sir?
The answer is no. Had the opposition had an input into this budget, it would have been a people-centered budget. It would have been a budget in which we make recommendations for our people to benefit more and to be able to place this country on so that you appear to be contributing to development, but what you do is create the conditions for corruption and for the PPP, elite friends, favorite, etc., to enjoy themselves and get rich. The opposition would not have contributed to a budget in which we reduce the amount we spend on education. The opposition, even while in government, we were very focused on education because we know the critical role that human resource development plays in the development of any country. And so you would have had not only that a larger amount in education system, but you would have also had resources placed in areas to ensure that we can monitor and audit oil and gas. We would have had far more resources placed into training young people and creating the kind of leadership core that is needed in the future. A lot of these issues I will address in my budget speech.
Thank you. Questions on the press statement? All right. With that being said, I will open the floor for any other questions.
Mr. Norton, Dan Shibbolero again. Sir, in relation to the matter of wages and salaries, we have seen salary adjustments being made to members of the joint services and the health sector workers, but so far nothing has been done in relation to teachers. My question to you, sir, is what is the PNCR doing as far as union to ascertain what are their concerns about salary, that this matter is addressed equally?
First of all, the government seems to be playing the joint services against the rest of the public servants and the teachers. If you're a government that care, and you're a government that have an interest in the development of the, you would have had a proper survey done and then sought to address all the anomalies in a structured way. That is what a government that cares would have done. The government has a number of fallacies that they carry around. For instance, in the budget for the joint services, what he doesn't tell people is it doesn't go to your salary so that it improves your salary, it increases your salary, and therefore when the time comes for calculating your pension, it will carry up what you're entitled to get. And it is something the government continues to hide or be silent on. I've spoken with a number of persons in the joint services, unions, to first of all re-engage in collective bargaining. Secondly, we need to work with the trade unions to deal with these anomalies. I believe that our people are being dealt a bad hand by this government, and this is because they are not interested in improving the quality of life of the people. The government tends to see the allocation of resources in a way that allows it to put money in the hands of its friends, family, cronies, rather than in the hands of the people. And so there is need for a complete metamorphosis in how resources are allocated. And we need to begin to focus those resources on allocation in a way that the people will benefit. I've already mentioned that the government's approach to the public service, the joint services, etc., is really aimed at being divisive and dividing these groups. And we will have to work to educate people on what the government is doing and to work with the trade unions to ensure a lot of these matters are sorted out.
If I could just...
Yes, I was asking specifically what is your engagement like with the teachers union?
What is my what?
Engagement with the teachers union.
Are these engagements like with the teachers union and ensure that they too, their salaries too, are adjusted upwards for salary scales?
You are aware that our Shadow Minister Labour is also a member of that trade union.
If I could just build off of that, I think the question to ask, which to my mind is an obvious question, is this. This year we're seeing the budget be 1% larger than the previous year's budget. Is it that we believe that public service to the economy and so on? Now, the obvious question is, you can see when it comes to teachers, we're looking at better educational outcomes when teachers are paid more. Seems to think that spending on public servants is useless. That is the opposite. What spending on public servants actually is of great benefit to the nation. So as the budget increases and the government refuses to invest in public servants, the question that type of spending.
It is also important to note that the government seems to have a disregard for the public service and the objective it should set to achieve itself. If you just dump temporary workers in various with no set objectives, what you're doing is manifesting a callousness. People tell you that they are workers just in a health center doing nothing, or around some ministry doing nothing. And like I've said before, it's a manifestation that the government's employment policy has failed. Put a measure that will suggest they are creating employment, but what they're doing is ensuring there is underemployment rather than the creation of employment in a way that be in a better position to develop themselves and families. More importantly, they are using a lot of these people, they're paying 40 and 50,000 to attend activities of the ministers and the president so that they look as if they are getting a crowd. I believe this is an old-time communist tactic that the PPP is using.
Thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Shamar.
The government has been forging ahead with its transformational agenda, and a number of informal squatters or settlers are being relocated, some of whom are saying that they were not consulted with. Can you offer a comment on that?
The government is a very callous government. And one has to recognize how the government deals with squatters. They have different strokes for different folks. There is no clear policy. They support this, they tend to engage them and try and find an amicable solution. But when they perceive it is not their support base, they proceed with. And it does appear to me that the government has a strategy to dispossess those people who they don't see as their supporters and put resources in their hands. The supporters at the lower level that are not enjoying the benefits of this big PPP loot of Guyana.
Thank you. You said you had another question, Mr. Allen?
Recently, a link recording for 43 members of the PNCR surveyed, and some section of the media said the party needs to get it act together or to think further into the political wastebasket. What is your take on that?
Well, people are allowed to make statements because there's some amount of freedom. But I can say to you that the party has increased its membership since there are many professionals who are assisting and helping voluntarily. Our economic council are not persons who are party activists, but they are people who in recent times have come to the, and therefore I wouldn't worry with people's comments. There are always people in any society who are opposed to whatever you do. even there are people who you could be doing the best and they will find ways of saying you aren't. So I will just ignore those kinds of comments and continue to focus our membership. Our party is moving forward together, and that is what for me matters.
Thank you. I see the hand of Miss Rihanna. Miss Ramsey, sorry.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My question is, you plan on monitoring the disbursement?
Well, we would have liked to be involved in the monitoring and the disbursement of it. The government, first of all, if it was properly done, you would have had in the budget the areas it would have been allocated to. And therefore, you would be in a position to say, well, look, this is a good area for it to be allocated to or not to be allocated to. What the government does is put a blanket figure, which is poor budgeting, but they do it because when the time comes to distribute it, they want to be involved in corruption. Let us go back and see what they did. They said they were giving fisher folks a grant, and you have no problem. But when you get on the ground, they give taxi drivers, people who weren't involved in corruption. And so I think we will monitor it as much as we can, but the very nature of how they put it in the budget, the aim is to ensure there is no scrutiny and accountability and provide them with a slush fund for them to get richer.
Thank you. All right.
So there's nothing basically that the opposition can do to fix that or address that?
Well, I'm saying to you that we will have to be on the ground and monitoring it at the time of delivery, like we did when it was, they said they give it to the fisher folk, and you knew right away from engagement. When I was in Coriverton, people were saying to me, look, taxi driver got one. Man said, look, I'm a taxi driver and I didn't want to tell anybody, but if I'm given it, I will take it. So I'm saying to you, we can put some mechanisms in place. But because the government does not operate by budgeting standards, you have a situation where they just put a figure, and it's difficult to know who it is going to go to, when it is going to go to them, and what mechanism will be used. Let us not forget that the first COVID cash grant, the PPP used its activists, distribute to who they want, leave out who they didn't want, and the monitoring we could have done was basically be on the ground, getting the information from people. We'll continue to do that. But the government does not operate in a way that allows a structured approach to monitoring and evaluation.
Thank you. Mr. Adam Harris?
Yes, good morning. No, sir, you keep talking about, you're calling on the wider society to object and to the measures adopted by the government for certain things like the demolition of this girl Ellis home and her loss of job. But sir, for the past 2 years, I have noticed that thing don't work. You can say what you like, the government does what it like. And as you said, you can have your say and have my view. Is the party looking at any other measure that could force the government to do the right thing when it needs to serve?
Yes, we have been, we have to, and we will. But I would say to you, we will do. You must recognize, there are some trends in this country that are disturbing. When the Demerara Harbor Ball, the facts later showed that we weren't. We're seeing a trend in Guyana now where people are hitting at the core of our education system by burning schools. And then we hear schemes of people wanting the land where the school is. In the case of St. George's, we heard that the church said they wouldn't sell. But it does appear to me that there's a scheme emerging in which actions are being taken by people who are greedy to be able to get key lands in Georgetown. And at this time, one has to be very, very careful, because what the government will seek to do is to insinuate it has opposition involvement, even though it didn't. When there was the attack on, or I should put alleged attack on State House, again attempts were made to insinuate the involvement of the opposition. The opposition, of course, had nothing to do with it, but until now, you cannot get a police report on the matter. They seem to have made this a private issue between the PPP government and the police, whereas what you should have had is an investigation and a report made public on this issue. Importantly, we have to do work to further activate citizens. You would admit that a lot of people operate in fear. When the PPP dismisses Ms. Ellis, they are sending the signal to people that we will violate your rights and we will do as we please. There has to be a response, but it has to be careful and be taken in the context of what is happening in Guyana. Also remember that the government controls the media, and they are very quick to point things in the direction away from them, even if it is they themselves that are doing it.
All right, thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Sherwal.
Mr. Norton, can you give us an update on the appointment or reappointment of the treasurer of your party? And secondly, is your party willing to address the appointment? Are you willing to re-examine that to see whether indeed it was in keeping with the constitution of your party?
The party has an auditor. I said that the last time. The party over the years has always appointed an auditor. And if we don't change that auditor continues to be the auditor until we change it. That's the first thing. As it relates to the treasurer, the party constitution will determine what happened. The treasurer has resigned. It means that the treasurer is no longer a member of the executive of the party, because in our constitution, the treasurer is elected to the position of treasurer, and it is that position of treasurer that makes him or her a member of the central executive. So when you resign from the executive as well. Now, the question of how we approach the treasurer is something the party began discussing at its central executive last evening, and we will continue. However, it's a matter that is a party matter, and it is not our intention to be discussing it in the public domain.
Just procedurally though, what happens in this instance? Would it mean that you have to appoint an interim treasurer, or would you have to now go back to?
Our party constitution is public. Our party constitution is a public document. I invite you to read it on this question.
On the question of the auditor, though, the party constitution says as auditor, but how do you say with what the constitution says that the general council shall appoint an auditor at the first meeting after the biennial delegates conference?
The party has a practice over the years. Over the years, the party has identified an auditor. And even after auditor, you don't necessarily go back to General Counsel and ask them for a new auditor. The practice in the party over the years has been to continue with the auditor. And only if they're going to change the auditor, they go to the General Counsel and change the auditor.
Okay. So you're working basically by convention, not necessarily with scripts.
By both a combination of convention and the Constitution.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see the hand of Ms. Zena Henry.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to find out about the cost audit statement. I know the opposition is concerned about these cost audits being delayed. Is there any intent to use the Parliament to access certain documents, for example, the cost recovery statement? We know that Parliament as a body could recommend increased checks and balances. Is that something that the opposition would be willing to take to Parliament? I mean, it can, to some extent, show how far we're willing to go to maintain the checks and balances of our oil funds.
Yeah, the opposition is prepared to, but the opposition wants to do more than that. The opposition wants to pressure the government into a situation where they recognize that we need to train Guyanese to be able to audit those accounts. While we welcome the use of international, etc., one has to develop the capacity of the Guyanese to be able to audit, to monitor, and to do whatever evaluation is needed to ensure that we get the most that we can in terms of profit from the oil deal. And so we are disposed to anything that will allow the Guyanese people to benefit more from our natural resources generally, but oil in particular.
Sorry, can you also give your comments on the delay of the audit? It was
Go ahead.
for the release in December, which I think is the second date that was given for its completion. Can you give the opposition's position on these delays?
We believe that the PPP government does not believe in accountability. They do not believe in transparency. And so they will do everything to keep everything secret. The fact that they are not seeking...
The thing I would mention to build off of that is that really we as a nation must understand that we're setting, in essence, with this first cost style audit, a precedent. And is it going to be that from now on, the audits of all of our cost oil expenses, whether it is with Exxon, whether it is with other companies that produce oil in Guyana, are going to be kept secret? Is that going to be how this country's oil industry is going to be run? And Guyanese need to have that front of mind. Recall, it is a raw audit is of 7 billion set that the government can conceal these government concealing the audit. What is the reason the government is hiding the audit? And continue to ask that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. At this time, if there is any final question.
Yeah, sorry.
You can go ahead, Mr. Harris.
And it could involve the entire panel. Panels. Now, I see from time to time on some social media accounts, given what's in the budget, given the fact that people are disgruntled, is there going to be an intensification of fan-out exercises with the various parts? I see a comment show where Auditor, for example, on his program talking about Region 2. Can I expect to see more have come as the party accounts? But is she also going to be a part of the fan-out, or will she be confined to an office?
I think Don can answer that simply.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Harris, and good afternoon, everyone. I have a responsibility to represent my constituency, and hence I will undertake both tasks to function as the General Secretary, and I also know that as a part of me being a representative with the leader and my other MPs in order to fully understand and to have first-hand knowledge of what is happening. You know that I lived in the interior for many years, and after we were out of government, I got